23XI Racing and Front Row Motorsports will race as open cars this weekend in Dover after a judge's decision. Kyle Larson wins the Joker's Jackpot on Thursday night at Eldora. Plus, what's going on with the 2026 NASCAR Cup Series schedule. Welcome back to Break Hard. I'm Matt. It turns out that not everything was right over at R Motorsports because they are ceasing operations after this weekend's race at Dover. So the team announced this week they had parted ways with driver Chris Wright. Kaz Grall is going to be in the car for this weekend's race at Dover, and after Dover, they will cease operations, which is a bit of a bummer, right? Because this team, when it came onto the scene, did have a little bit of speed. Brett Moffitt took them to a second place finish, maybe more than once now that I'm thinking of it. They won poles, I think once with Anthony Alfredo. They seemed like a team that was going to be on the upswing. If they won a race, you weren't going to be shocked. You'd be like, oh man, that's cool to see a first-time winner. But at one point, they did run competitively. Then they parted ways with Anthony Alfredo after last season. They hired Chris Wright, which is the obvious indicator here that they needed some money because they hired a pay driver, that being Chris Wright. I don't think that's any secret. His family's name was on the side of that car more often than not. And ultimately, the partnership just didn't work out. So it's sad to see a team go off, the grid. It's sad to see a car go down because you don't want to ever see car counts drop, essentially. But for the people that were surprised, I don't know how you were that surprised by this. It kind of had the writing on the wall when they hired Chris Wright, and then ultimately when they parted ways with him, it was going to be a struggle for the rest of the season. But the team did thank NASCAR, the fans, Chevrolet, and their sponsors and everything like that. But Kaz Grall will give them one final send-off this weekend in Dover. But let's get into what we want to talk about today. And we're going to start off with 23XI Racing, Front Row Motorsports. They will race as open cars this weekend in Dover and next weekend in Indianapolis after a judge on Thursday denied their request for a temporary restraining order, which would have allowed them to keep their chartered status. Now, it is worth noting that the judge did not make a ruling on the preliminary injunction that the teams requested as well. That will happen sometime over the next 2 weeks. NASCAR has said that they will not sell the charters in the next 2 weeks. So wait for that judge and his decision to be made there. But this is a very, very pivotal. I can't stress enough how pivotal this moment is for the teams, because if they get that preliminary injunction, they're going to maintain their chartered status. NASCAR will basically allow them to have those 6 charters as it currently stands and then go to the trial in December and they'll duke it out there. However, if the judge denies their request for a temporary injunction, then NASCAR is free to sell those charters. And I see a lot of comments. I see a lot of comments on previous videos that I posted on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, everywhere, of people being like, how can NASCAR sell these charters if the teams paid for them? Which, you're correct. The teams did pay for those charters, and that money does not go to NASCAR. That goes between the two parties, the seller and the buyer. NASCAR doesn't get a chunk of that. Part of owning a charter is contingent on signing the charter agreement, and those two teams did not sign the charter agreement last year. So when December 31st struck midnight and went to January 1, 2025 this year, those teams didn't have charters anymore. They got that preliminary injunction to maintain their charter status as they're going through the legal process here. But the judge in this case, now Kenneth Bell, first sided with the teams and now has seemingly sided with NASCAR on the interpretation of what this preliminary injunction is. So the Fourth Circuit of Appeals Court overturned the injunction, which allowed NASCAR to pull those charters away. The teams contested that. They're now seeking a new temporary injunction, which is where we're at now. I wouldn't read into Judge Bell denying the temporary restraining order versus, does that mean he's going to deny the preliminary injunction as well? I wouldn't read too far into that. There's a lot more that goes into the preliminary injunction versus the temporary restraining order. And part of the reason that he denied the temporary restraining order is because the teams couldn't show that they would suffer irreparable harm from this, because they're still going to be able to race this weekend in Dover, next weekend in Indianapolis, because the car counts aren't going to be above 40. So the teams will still qualify. They don't need that guaranteed starting spot. But the teams are very scared that NASCAR could potentially sell their charters, and they told the court just that, saying, quote, thereby for all practical purposes in their existence as realistic competitor in the NASCAR Cup Series if their charters are sold, which is very much true. Without a charter, you can still race as an open team, but financially it just doesn't make sense. It's not feasible unless you have a big time sponsor that's going to cover the basic loss of money that you're going to have between being a charter team and being an open team, as the teams are currently going to have to compete this weekend and next weekend as well, and Indy. And for this weekend, all the teams that do have charters, the 30 other charters out there, technically 32 charters, since the 2 Stewart-Haas Racing charters did sign the charter agreement, they're all going to get an increased payout this weekend as well. So they're kind of probably going to be a little bit happy about that. The teams have also argued, and part of their first preliminary injunction was that losing their charters would mean that they could potentially lose their drivers, potentially lose their sponsors as well. Tyler Reddick's name was used as an example multiple times to get that first preliminary injunction, amongst other things. The judge, though, wasn't buying it this time around, and he said, quote, while plaintiffs' drivers could have realistically terminated their contracts with plaintiffs and or been lured away by other teams, that prospect, although theoretically still conceivable, appears unlikely at this late stage of the season, and plaintiffs have not offered evidence that any drivers are intending to do so in the next 2 weeks. So basically saying, your drivers aren't going anywhere. Your drivers are here for the season, so you can't make that argument anymore. You could make that argument in the offseason. Definitely can make that argument in the offseason, but in season just wouldn't really make any sense. We're not going to see like a Jeff Green, Steve Parks type of driver swap here, or even what we saw last year with Corey LaJoie and Justin Haley. Like, that's just not going to happen. Of course, the teams, or the lawyer Jeffrey Kessler, said that they're super disappointed, but they still believe that they have a really strong case for December's trial date, and they're still going to prove that NASCAR is monopolistic in all their ventures and everything that they've been saying up to this point. Didn't expect anything less out of their statement there. But for now, those teams will race as open cars, which means that they're not guaranteed a starting spot and they're going to receive less money in terms of payout. And now we wait to see what the court decides in terms of that preliminary injunction, which, like I said before, I can't stress enough, is a pivotal moment in all of this. Let's move on to some dirt racing now. It is a big time weekend in dirt racing, especially for the sprint car series. The high limit sprint car series had a Wednesday, Thursday night show at Eldora, followed up by the Friday, Saturday show at Eldora for the World of Outlaws, capping off with the Kings Royal on Saturday night. But on Thursday night, it was high limit, making their debut on cable television live on FS1 from Eldora Speedway for the Joker's Jackpot, a non-points race. Winner takes home $100,000, and you'll never guess who won that race. Kyle Larson, Young Money Kyle Larson, goes to victory lane at Eldora. Anthony Macri finished in second, the Concrete Kid, along with Rico Abreu coming home in third, and a track that was treacherous on Wednesday night, and it was treacherous on Thursday night as well. And the A feature got off to an absolutely chaotic and violent start on Thursday night. Going off into turn one, Brad Sweet, Tyler Courtney, Hunter Schoenberg, Buddy Kofoid, and there's somebody else I'm missing in there. My apologies. All got caught up in a big time wreck. I mean, when I say violent, it was one of the more violent wrecks you'll ever see in a sprint car. Tyler Courtney goes into the wall, top of the cage first. Hate to see that. It's just like an Indy car. You never want to see a car, any car. Let me rephrase that. You never want to see any race car go into a wall, into a fence, roof first. That is bad news all around right there. The safety crews were able to get Buddy Kofoid's car flipped over, and they were able to go rush over to Tyler Courtney's car. And thankfully for the broadcast, they did a wide shot. They zoomed out. They didn't zoom in on it. They're clearly taking a lot of time with Tyler Courtney. They finally were able to extract him from that vehicle. Thankfully, he is okay. For the most part, he was awake and alert, communicating with the staff there at the racetrack. And then on Thursday night, his team, his wife, or fiance rather, tweeted out that he has movement in all of his extremities, which is fantastic news, because that is obviously the scariest part about sprint car racing, is how violent the wrecks can be, but also that threat of paralysis or a big time spinal cord injury, anything like that, which has unfortunately been a part of the game for forever, and has affected some drivers over the last few years, to say the least. So thankfully, Tyler Courtney is all right. Once the race got started again, though, we had a really good race all night. Eldora is a super fast, super sketchy racetrack at times, and we saw multiple cars on both Wednesday night and Thursday night wreck by themselves, just get bit sliding off into turn one, and then all of a sudden they either hop the cushion, just catch it wrong, and they go tumbling. Gio Scelzi did it on Wednesday night. We saw David Gravel do it on Thursday night. Just some of the best, just getting bit by Eldora. Like, it is a fast racetrack. Eldora is a beast in itself. And Kyle Larson just ripped the top the entire night, doing what Kyle Larson does. Some hectic restarts for sure. Some guys making some moves. Macedo was definitely throwing it around there at the probably the midpoint of that race. Brad Sweet was trying to come from the back after getting his top wing just basically ripped all the way off, and they had to put a new right rear on that car after his lap one wreck or involvement in that big wreck there. Ultimately, it was Anthony Macri trying to chase down Kyle Larson, wasn't able to get there. Rico had a strong car to start the race, and then just once he got back in traffic a little bit, just couldn't get back up there. And it was Kyle Larson winning the day. And I saw some people being like, I don't want to see Kyle Larson win because the race is on cable, so it's a new audience, right? Because not everybody subscribes to Flow to be able to watch it. And they're going to think that, sprint car racing's easy because Kyle Larson can just hop in here and do it. And it's like, well, Kyle Larson's a bit of a freak when it comes to this. He's really good on dirt, and he's really good in NASCAR as well. There's not many, outside of maybe Chris Bell, other NASCAR drivers right now that could hop into a 410 sprint car and win on a national tour basically every time they get into it. So, yeah, I think it's on one hand good that Kyle Larson won that race because it was a recognizable name for all of the new people that tuned in to watch that race. On the other hand, I can understand sprint car people and dirt people being like, yeah, but this sucks because now everybody's going to think that NASCAR drivers can come down here and just kind of dominate this, which they absolutely can't. They can race it, but nobody's going to be able to replicate really what Kyle Larson has been able to do. But overall, I thought it was successful. Maybe we'll see more sprint car racing on cable. I don't think that's a bad thing at all, but obviously the Flow business model works a certain way. So we'll see how it plays out. All right, let's talk about the 2026 schedule real fast here because obviously yesterday we talked about San Diego joining the calendar next season with a street race, whether that's in downtown, on Coronado. We'll have to wait and see how all of that plays out. But the big question is, where's that race date going to come from? The logical answer would be like, it's going to come from Chicago. Well, now it appears that NASCAR and Chicago are engaged in talks to potentially have that race again next year. Obviously, Chicago wants to move that race off of the 4th of July weekend. For NASCAR, they'd have to find a spot on the calendar where it makes sense to put it logistically. I will say that I know that Chicago is a great race for sponsors. NASCAR really likes doing the event. Chicago really likes having the event. Now, there's still some financial things that need to get worked out behind it, but that could still theoretically be on the calendar next year. So would NASCAR have 2 street races? They possibly could. I think it comes down to 1, sponsorship, 2, what the networks want, and 3, if it makes financial sense for everybody involved. There's going to be a lot of talk about Chicagoland Speedway because the Sports Business Journal reported that NASCAR has recently explored the possibility of going back to the track in Joliet, a little over, an hour outside of Chicago. Clearly, the Gen 7 car races well on intermediates. People before were like, get rid of intermediates, go to road courses, go to short tracks. Now everybody's like, get rid of short tracks, get rid of road courses, go to intermediates. It just is an ebb and flow. When we get the Gen 8 car, then who knows where we're going to want to go to next. But for now, people really want to go back to Chicagoland. Obviously, it's going to take some money and some effort to get that track back up into race day condition. The Athletics said it would be somewhere around $4 million, which is not that much in the grand scheme of things, considering the amount of money NASCAR spends on the Chicago street race. It all comes down to, do the networks want to be there? Do the sponsors want to be there? Does it make sense to have that on the calendar? It could be on the calendar. We'll see how it goes. Mexico is one of the big talking points. And it appears that after a successful race this year, it may not be back on the calendar in 26, but could likely return in 2027. Next year's calendar schedule, it's hectic. Mexico City is going to host, I believe, 5 matches for the World Cup, while the United States hosts majority, and Canada will also host some as well. They obviously have their Formula One date in late summer, early fall, I guess, however you want to look at that. And then the springtime would be realistically the only time NASCAR could go. IndyCar's exploring, possibly having a race date that weekend as well. So there is a possibility that Mexico, while everybody wants to go back, won't be on the schedule for 26, but could come back in 27. And that could possibly be where you get that date for San Diego from, if Chicago, either stays on the street course or goes down to Chicagoland Speedway. So for the most part, that's kind of where the schedule stands at right now. I wouldn't anticipate going to Canada next year. I saw Freddie Kraft mention that on Door Over Clear this past week, that NASCAR has been exploring, or he at least mentioned, Mosport up there, Canadian Tire Motorsport Park, where the Truck Series raced at until 2019. It's a fun road course. Infrastructure wise, hosting a cup race there is going to be a lot. I mean, it's just 2-lane roads around there. Think Mid-Ohio, just think Mid-Ohio, because that's kind of the similar setup in terms of infrastructure around it that I would compare it to. It would be cool to go. I just don't know if it makes sense to send the Cup Series there as of now. But obviously NASCAR would like to go north of the border. Going to Circuit Gilles Villeneuve in Montreal is a bit of, again, a logistical nightmare and a lot of red tape around that as well. COTA appears to be back on the schedule next year, running the short course once again. That is obviously a lease deal with SMI. The second date that was Texas is now down over at COTA. But other than that, I think you might see some dates shift around a little bit, but I wouldn't, anticipate too many new tracks coming on the schedule, potentially just one there, possibly an old one coming back. We'll see how it goes. But I think that's kind of where the landscape lies for the Cup Series as it stands. So let me know in the comments what you thought or think about those teams having to race as open cars this weekend in Dover, Kyle Larson winning the Joker's Jackpot, as well as the 2026 schedule. Like and subscribe to the channel. Follow me on TikTok at BreakHard, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at BreakHardBlog.